Mia Marcano was born in the family of Marlon and Emma Marcano. A little later in their family, there was a second child, a boy who was named the same as his father, Marlon. At home, he was affectionately called Marl Jr. The family lived in the town of Pembroke Pines in the state of Florida. When the girl was 6 years old, parents divorced, but both father and mother maintained human relations with her. The father had a new lover, Giselle, and surprisingly, the children warmly accepted her. They had no quarrels and scandals, often played together and attended entertainment events. Mia was considered enterprising, hardworking, and talented student, attracted to herself with a special charm and energy. After graduation, she did not leave the state and applied to the Regional University of Central Florida, also considered studying at Valencia College, where she could become a Bachelor of Arts. Then there were plans to become a sports medic, helping athletes recover from serious injuries and arranging appropriate therapy. Mia has always been drawn to art in many forms, fashion and design. Therefore, the inquisitive girl often attended local festivals, shows, and exhibitions. Such events were held in her state almost every 2 weeks. This was one of the motivations to stay here. Home and small homeland, the perfect place. Here, she developed and created. During her college years, she left her dad and stepmom's house and moved into the Adwan Villas housing development. Many students from her school rented apartments there. The girl did not want to depend on anyone financially and looked for part-time work. She managed to find a decent option in one real estate agency. Mia's tasks included showing apartments to clients and arranging leases for new tenants. The place of work was a 10-minute walk from the university. The supervisor arranged an optimal schedule for the student to combine with her studies. Her parents' home was an hour's flight from the school, and the girl flew to visit her relatives on weekends. September 24, 2021 was a normal day as Mia packed up to go home. The process was set up, and her parents were eagerly waiting for her. However, their daughter did not arrive this time. Not only that, she did not contact or even board the flight and was not at the airport that day. The family was alarmed, not on a joke, because such a disappearance before the girl did not allow. The father went to the airport. The plane landed, but there was no daughter among the passengers. To call and send her messages was useless. In response, silence. At 9:30 p.m., the worried parents went to the local police, asking them to send officers to the Arden Villas housing estate. Perhaps nothing untoward had happened, but a check wouldn't hurt. Sheriff's Deputy Samir Puolino decided not to involve deputies and traveled alone to said apartment complex on a private jet. The flight took 50 minutes. Samir was already there at 10:30 p.m., questioned the residents' lodgers, janitors. It turned out that no one had seen her that day. One woman advised to wait for the students' friends, as they were her roommates and might know something. It took about 15 minutes to wait for the girls. They tried to open the door of the room, but the lock would not yield to the key. It all seemed very strange. No one responded to the knocks and calls. Samir then decided to examine the room through the window and found that the entrance door was blocked by a small cupboard. The policeman allowed himself to climb inside and saw a frightening picture. Things and clothes scattered everywhere. There were numerous red stains on the pillow. The bedding was torn, jewelry broken. The suitcase that Mia usually flew with is packed and put in a corner. Plus, the windows should have security locks on them that the girl's dad had put in, but someone had broken them before Samir arrived. That's why it was so easy for the deputy to get into the room. He found no clues as to the students' whereabouts. But the surroundings of the room warranted a major investigation. Paulino conferred with his supervisor, Corporal Dale. Both had not yet filed a criminal complaint. Samir was still dealing with other cases and calls and was not in a hurry to make conclusions after the inspection of Mia's room. Meanwhile, her roommate was greatly disturbed by the policeman's visit and her friend's disappearance. Without waiting for the authorities to react, she herself went to the police station near Arden Villas. The officers recorded her statement and pointed her finger at a suspicious man working in the neighborhood. He was showing a lot of attention to Mia, who did not reciprocate it. This person turned out to be Armando Caballero, a 27-year-old employee of the apartment building who cleaned the grounds. His excessive infatuation with Mia and even her stalking was confirmed by many witnesses. neighbors, janitors, and others. Perhaps Armando was in love with the 19-year-old student and did not want to put up with her rejections. But his behavior resembled obsession. He didn't realize that all his invitations to date were futile. Mia feared such a beau and tried to avoid communicating with him. Did not help him even a fancy gift. A transfer of $700 through the Cash App with the comment, "To the most beautiful girl on earth." The girl did not need a handout and transferred this amount back with the comment, "You don't need to buy me." When Mia disappeared, other young women living in the complex confessed to the police that the indefatigable Armando was stalking them too, explaining his behavior with ardent love. One girl he asked out on a date via a note back in March 2021. He called her to a luxurious restaurant with live music, and the young lady initially agreed but gave a refusal at the last moment. Heated Caballero was very angry and promised revenge. That same night, a stone flew into the window of the refuser. In this flight, she suspected Armando, called the police. The officers took a statement, organized several raids, and their work was completed. The case was quickly closed without charging anyone. On September 25th, Mia's family arrived at Arden Villas early in the morning. Paulino escorted them to their daughter's room, where nothing had changed since the last inspection. After looking around the room, the parents highlighted the following nuances that Samir had missed. A knife for cutting cardboard boxes under the bed. A teddy bear on the floor, although Mia adored it and treated it carefully. Scattered and broken jewelry. The girl never let herself do that. An hour later, Armando himself came to the room with his companion. Logically, the man should have been at work, but he came here. The girl's parents knew very well what kind of character he was, and their daughter often complained about him, and the police had already pointed him out as an indirect suspect. When asked why he had come here and brought a friend, he said that he knew from an acquaintance about the disappearance of the girl and was very concerned about it and wanted to know the details of what had happened. He introduced the acquaintance as Tati, who was also his colleague. One of the police officers examined the roster of employees of the complex. No Tati was found in it. But Armando continued to claim that it was a woman with that name who had given him the unpleasant news. Mia's parents looked at him with contempt, based on their daughter's story, and had no doubt that he was not telling the truth. In their opinion, he was the #1 suspect in the case, but he ignored all the accusations, explained that he was incapable of hurting Mia and had not seen her himself the day she disappeared. The police at that moment saw no point in talking to him anymore, and they had no right to detain him. He silently left the premises, got into a car, and drove away. Meanwhile, the sheriff and his deputies got busy looking into Armando's personality and background and discovered some interesting facts. In 2013, an arrest for using homemade explosives in a student dormitory, causing property damage and shooting on campus. In 2017, aggravated assault on citizens with a deadly weapon. In 2013, Polk County Police arrived on a call to that dormitory. The perpetrator confessed to what he had done and attributed his misdemeanor to wanting to play a joke on the residents. Fortunately, no one was killed or injured at the time. The facts found spoke of Armando's violent character and even inadequacy, and the investigators paid close attention to him. The security guard working at the apartment building on the day Mia went missing lifted fingerprints from the window and broken security features in her room. A special tape helped him do it. But Samir Paulino did not take this material because he did not consider the case to be of special importance. The guard also pointed out to the police some other things. On the back seat of Caballero's car, there was a screwdriver and a cell phone case that belonged to Mia. But police at the time did not have a warrant to open the citizen's car and search it. Orange County Sheriff John Mina got involved and said that his officers had examined the video surveillance cameras in the LCD. And the picture they got is not enough to arrest Armando. It is not of the best quality and does not depict what happened that night and day. Soon, the sheriff from Mia's hometown arrived. He had known the girl since she was a child and was greatly disturbed by her disappearance. He promptly involved the search services and gave the order to start an official investigation. The parents of the missing girl insisted on a search of Armando's apartment because his behavior is strange and he is probably hiding something. The investigators agreed with this decision and were waiting for the necessary warrant from the higher authority. Marlon Marcano himself conducted surveillance of the suspect's house without any coordination, skillfully hiding in a car. Mia's father saw the following picture. Armando came out of the driveway with gloves, a backpack, and a pink plaid that belonged to the missing student. Soon the warrant was obtained, and the cops paid a visit to Caballero, taking both Marlon and Emma Marcano with them. Only they are not supposed to touch anything while the search is going on. They were only allowed to look. However, because of the bureaucracy and long organization, the police were late. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Armando fled in an unknown direction. This act was interpreted as a runaway, and at 4:30 in the afternoon, the man was officially declared the main suspect in the disappearance of the girl. His apartment was never entered, although they had the authority to break in. The runaway himself contacted a friend at 9:30 p.m., and he disappeared shortly thereafter. It's possible they may have run away together. They tried to find the girl dead or alive. This work was carried out not only by authorized bodies, but also by hundreds of volunteers. Significant areas were searched, but no trace of Mia was found. Specialists analyzed the information about the house where the girl lived in that LCD. In the afternoon at 2:15, the day before Mia went missing, someone entered the premises using her electronic pass. That person turned out to be Armando. A couple hours later, he came back inside. An hour later, the girl herself used that pass. She ran to get her things to go to the airport. Only she never made it to the airport. The information received led to the conclusion that Caballero went into the room and waited there for the appearance of Mia. And at 5:52 p.m., his vehicle was spotted leaving the complex. After reviewing the camera footage, it was clear that the student had shown up at the house but did not leave on her own. Either she was smuggled out or she's still within the confines of the apartment complex. On September 27, law enforcement had an official document to arrest Armando, so far only on burglary charges. Although many realized that his crime was more severe, it was impossible to prove it yet. Specialists were preparing to declare the suspect in the federal wanted list as they received a call with shocking news. Armando Caballero left his life. He committed suicide. Events were developing rapidly, and there was a fear that information about the whereabouts and details of Mia's disappearance could never be learned. However, the police already had Armando's cell phone at their disposal with useful information. It turned out that the man had recorded a call to technical support from the girl's house. And it happened at 7:01 p.m., a couple hours after she went missing. Forensics thought the call was a sham to deflect suspicion, because at 7:11 p.m., Caballero was already in front of the entrance to the apartment building asking to be let in. At 7:16 p.m., someone stole a bunch of keys to Mia's apartment. It's possible the thief was Armando, and the guards wouldn't confirm his guilt, but they were 100% sure it wasn't Mia who left the house. At 7:40 p.m., Caballero had already left the compound by car, heading to his former residential address, where he stayed for 20 minutes. That area was full of abandoned buildings and dense vegetation that transitioned into a wooded area. This sector was terrifying, even in daylight. Armando's old house was half destroyed, and what the former owner had been doing in it for 20 minutes remained a mystery. Previously, search teams had explored many locations, but never came here. Now the investigators had a specific area to explore, and all forces were brought in to do the job, including the FBI. All the circumstances were such that the girl was unlikely to be found alive. But her relatives and friends still nourished hope for a better outcome and prayed to the light forces and attracted public attention to the case. Search operations continued until October 2, 2021. On that day, even the slightest chance of success was destroyed. 18 miles away from the famed Arden Villas housing estate, in an abandoned section where Armando was visiting, the corpse of Mia Marcano was found in dense bushes, among the junk. Her hands, feet, and mouth were taped with black duct tape. The only clothes the victim was wearing were jeans, a blouse, and a bra. A bag with a passport and a shirt, in which the girl was last seen during her lifetime, was also in a row. Later, an autopsy proved the fact of violent death. But since the body was badly decomposed, they couldn't identify the method of murder. The report also failed to show signs of rape. In the place where Armando killed himself, they found hair and drops of blood belonging to Mia. They found remnants of the same duct tape in the perpetrator's car. They also examined Caballero's own body. The body was covered with various injuries and his fingers showed signs of human bites. It's likely that Mia fought back desperately in the act of violence. With the prime suspect dead and no new evidence coming to light, the case was closed. And the public never learned what happened that fateful day. The horrifying event did bring some relief. The family was heartbroken, but was able to organize a decent funeral for her daughter. The memorial service was held on October 15, 2021. The event was attended by over 2,000 people. The victim's parents also agreed to a television broadcast on a local TV channel. About 500 people chose to wear the victim's favorite color, blue. All honored Mia's short but bright comet-like life. The outcome of the case shocked many. It drew particular ire from the residents of the Arden Villas housing estate. It turned out that their security was quite fragile, and the death of the unfortunate girl only instilled more fear. Residents of the complex have always been concerned about the extended powers of the maintenance staff. For example, such workers could quietly enter any apartment at any time. Okay, if the worker is honest and decent. But what if he is like Armando or worse? Similar questions were addressed to the management company. Citizens also insisted that electronic passes be canceled or improved. The system in place in their building did not guarantee anyone's safety. The case was closed, but the outcry in its aftermath was massive. An internal investigation determined incompetent actions of sheriff's deputies at the beginning of the investigation. The same Samir Paulino, the first to inspect Mia's room, did not follow the proper rules during the search, did not inform the head about important details, blood on the pillow and damaged jewelry. Because of such shortcomings, the girl was registered as a person who fled to an unknown destination of her own free will. The fact of abduction was not identified. Neither Samir nor his supervisor reported the missing student to the criminal department. A great deal of time was lost, and a large-scale search began significantly later. Supervisor Rick Raymond, formerly an officer in the police department and now a private investigator, pointed out key mistakes by police officers. When Armando showed up at Mia's apartment the next 24 hours after her disappearance, they should have detained him under any pretext. That way, investigators would have bought time and not had to agonize over finding a suspect later. When the dead girl's family demanded to detain this citizen because of the mass of other evidence, it was not necessary to ignore their requests. It took too long to get a search warrant for Armando's apartment. The man escaped. Sheriff Mina responded to these claims by saying that Samir Paulino did not have the full information during the initial inspection, which the specialists took possession of later. And then it took quite some time to uncover other evidence. But in general, Raymond is right. Internal Affairs took an interest in the work of Samir Paulino and his boss. Allegations of unprofessional standards were prepared. Based on past mistakes, adjustments have been made to the algorithm for officers responding to missing persons reports. Police officers are now required to refer any findings to the Criminal Investigation Department. Samir Paulino was disciplined with 150 hours of suspension. Corporal Kenneth Dale, his supervisor, received a similar sanction, only in a lesser amount, 10 hours. It was published by the police in March 2022 and included over 100 pages. It detailed all the information on Armando Caballero and the justification for treating him as the only suspect in the case of the disappearance and murder of Mia Marcano. The girl's family filed 2 lawsuits in the meantime. The first is against the Arden Villas housing development for the poor security organization of its residents that led to their daughter's death. The second is against the Orange County Sheriff for negligently handling the case and refusing to treat Mia's room as a crime scene. The company that owns the apartment complex in question responded that it would not allow such tragedies to happen in the area under its jurisdiction in the future and would improve its security technology. The defendant also added that Armando Caballero had been thoroughly vetted by the immigration office and the utility provider. No information was received about his violations of the law, nor did the burglary and sexual harassment make it into the file. Marcano's family accused the company of long ignoring their reports of their daughter's disappearance, and this organization has not acknowledged what happened or helped search for the missing girl and their employee. The victim's parents hope that there will be a real change for the better in the LCD, and they will get answers to their burning questions. As for the agency that launched that investigation, their employees have received their own criticism from the Marcano family as well. They were not informed about the progress of the investigation, the evidence found, and so on. In response, they kept saying that the investigation was ongoing. A public picket was organized against the company that owns Arden Villas. Citizens complained to the mayor's office and the courts about the poor organization of protection in this complex and other problems. Outdated video surveillance cameras with low resolution and picture quality, poor lighting in entrances and courtyards, general terrible maintenance. So, because of the poor lighting and lack of cameras in the parking lot, the perpetrator was able to get away quickly. Marcano's family initiated a high-profile lawsuit in court, and their lawsuit against Arden Villas was fully successful. In June 2022, the local Senate released the Maya Act. It required owners of real estate and especially large complexes to conduct scrupulous background checks on their potential employees. Citizens with violent criminal records are barred from working at such facilities. And the owners must keep a registration log in paper or electronic form, reflecting the exact time of the transfer of keys to any apartment. The person with passport data, who receives these keys, is also obligatorily indicated. And when the maintenance staff really need access to a particular apartment, they must inform the tenant of their visit 24 hours in advance. On the day Mia was to turn 20, her parents received a symbolic key to the town of Pembroke Pines. And in its history, the day of the girl's birth is officially inscribed as Mia Marcano Day. Then her family founded its own foundation, the main mission of which became support, education, and material assistance to citizens whose relatives are missing. The second range of objectives, the protection of students from weaker sections of the population. They are the ones who often volunteer in the search for the missing and are entitled to certain bonuses and allowances. Marcano's next activity is the MMF Safe and Secure Accreditation Program. Her goals: ensuring optimum safety in multifamily apartment buildings and complex, guaranteed staff development. Many measures are being implemented, and the residents of the complex are grateful to Marcano for their public policy. When the girl was supposed to fly home for the weekend as usual, tragedy struck. The details of her disappearance and death shocked her family and friends forever. To this day, there are many unanswered mysteries in the case. Life without Mia continues. The girl's aunt admitted that it is necessary to appreciate every minute because time ruthlessly flees. The brother believes that even if great happiness comes into his life, it will not bring him true joy because he will not be able to share it with his sister, who has always shared with him victories and defeats. Mom believes that everyone goes their own way, but she is stopped and will not find peace for the rest of her life until she finds out why her daughter was killed so brutally. Natalee Holloway was born in 1986 on the 21st of October, place of birth, the city of Clinton, Mississippi, and later changed her residence to Mountain Brook, Alabama. Her parents, father David and mother Beth, married in the early 1980s. It started all chic, love from the school bench, a stormy romance, dating, etc. But family life became increasingly filled with scandals and tension, and in 1993, the couple divorced. After Natalee, they had a second child, a boy. He was named Matthew. After the divorce, Beth Holloway kept the children and raised them alone. But after 5 years on her life path was a new man, George Jag Twitty. Their relationship grew into a serious romance, and in 2000, Beth married him. Her lover ran a successful business in the town of Mountain Brook in Alabama and settled Beth and her children in his house. Her ex-husband did not forget about Natalie and Matthew and supported them financially, and they grew up in prosperity and care. Natalie was an excellent student at Mountain Brook High School and was active in extracurricular activities. With her marks in the certificate, it was not difficult to enter a decent college or institute. The girl chose the University of Alabama, planning to get a red diploma and then a bachelor's degree. Natalie, for all the years of study, showed herself with the best side and deserved a quality vacation before the beginning of a new student life. Her friends found cheap vacations to Aruba and offered to take her on an exciting trip with them. The girl agreed, and her mother also approved of such a voyage. It turned out that it was not only Natalie and her classmates and friends who went on the trip, but also 125 other graduates from her school. 7 teachers accompanied them. The group arrived in Aruba on May 25, 2005. They had already booked almost an entire floor at the Holiday Inn, and they all settled in. The accompanying adults also missed the vacation and enjoyed it so much that their charges were left unsupervised. And for 2-3 days, Natalie and her friends had a blast. Sunbathing on the beach, swimming, diving, disco at nightclubs, drinking in the bars, trying her luck at the casino. Natalie tasted freedom for the first time in her life. As an adult, she could drink alcohol. The young people especially liked to visit places not far from the hotel where they lived, Carlos and Charlie's Club and the Exceller Casino. On the last day of their stay at the resort, May 29th, the friends decided to visit the gambling establishment once again. First, it was slot machines, then roulette. After that, blackjack. Natalie was fascinated by this card game, and she was fascinated by a stranger. He did not hesitate to come up and introduced himself as a student from the Netherlands, and gave his first and last name, Joran van der Sloot. The Dutchman was on vacation on this wonderful island, so he explained to the girl. They found common topics and had a fascinating conversation. The friends invited Natalie and her new acquaintance to a disco at Carlos and Charlie's. And the entertainment program moved there. Young people danced, drank, had fun. And it so happened that Natalie and Goran were alone at the bar. He ordered a couple of shots of tequila from the bartender. They looked at each other as if they knew each other for a long time, but the intoxicated girl didn't notice it. Nor did she see that Joran had put something in her shot. Neither the color nor the smell of the drink had changed. 2 or 3 drops were enough to turn Natalie into an obedient doll, unable to resist. This was a technique often used by con artists and rapists to seduce their victims so that they would remember nothing in the morning. The poor girl didn't understand what was happening. Joran explained to her that she had had too much to drink and suggested that they go to the beach to get some air and to look at the sharks near the lighthouse. Natalie couldn't refuse. They left the club and got into a waiting car, a silver Honda. It was driven by a man whom Joran greeted by the name Dipak, and next to him in the front seat was the driver's brother, called Sadish. Helpless, Natalie was thrown into the back seat, and she just watched as the strangers drove her away from the club to an unknown destination, and from that moment on, the girl was never seen again. May 30, 2005 was the day of departure from Aruba. It was only at the airport in Alabama that the group of graduates and their chaperones noticed that Natalie was missing. The mother of the missing girl sounded the alarm, argued with the teachers that they were not properly supervising the teenagers, and decided to fly to Aruba alone. An old acquaintance helped her by lending her a private plane with a pilot, and in 12 hours Beth landed on this paradise island and immediately went to the local police station, filed a missing persons report, and begged the operative to start a search for her daughter. The detective who took the appeal agreed to help her, and the first place they went to was that very club. It was necessary to review the camera footage from the previous night, and the director of the establishment provided the opportunity. In the available picture, Natalie was leaving with the Dutchman. Beth asked the manager if he knew the guy. He answered in the affirmative. It turned out that this Joran frequented the club and the nearby casinos almost every night and evening. He allowed himself inappropriate behavior and excessive fondness for card games and roulette. He was repeatedly found to be using illegal substances and engaging in bizarre activities. He was registered at his parents' house, but was more often in his own house, which was smaller, but completely satisfactory to him. The investigator checked Yawaran's background and found out his fraudulent scheme: acquaintance with young foreign women staying on the island for the last night, secluding himself with the chosen girl to be sure to separate from her company, treating her to strong alcohol with an unknown additive, substance X, as this element was called in the police, delivering the victim to his cabin, committing a sexual act of violence against her. The guy was tried several times as a defendant in rape cases, but his victims withdrew their statements and the process never went to trial. Beth was very tired after such a busy day and spent the night in a hotel. The next day, accompanied by a detective, she went to the Vandersloot house. The door was opened by Paul, the head of the family. He immediately recognized the version of the involvement of his son in the disappearance of Natal absurd. At that moment, from the second floor came down Yoran himself with his friends, the same Deepak and Satish Kalio. Beth urged them to confess where they had taken Natalie, since it was with Joran that she had been caught on camera. The boyfriend replied that he had bought the girl a drink and then taken her to a hotel with his companions. The father intervened in the conversation and told her to stop and to ask further questions only in the presence of a lawyer. He himself worked in the local court and was well versed in criminal matters. At this point, neither Beth nor the police had the right to question Joran, and they had to return to the station. But the missing girl's mother realized that daddy and son were being shady, and the hotel cameras were checked next. Not a single recording shows Natalie returning that night or later. The next morning, her ex-husband David flew to Aruba at Beth's request. He was just as concerned as she was about their daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, 2 days had passed since Natalie's disappearance. Her parents were convinced that Joran was responsible. The police, however, doubted this version and assured Beth that her daughter was about to return, and while she was walking somewhere, perhaps she had found a boyfriend. The investigators also voiced the possibility that Natalie had taken illegal substances on her own volition or was simply being rebellious. The parents saw the indifference of the police to their problem and decided to organize a search by their own efforts, for which they invited friends and relatives to the island. Everyone who was able to fly in at the time responded to the call. An active search for Natalie began in Aruba. The event made the news on the local TV channel. Other television crews picked up the baton, and soon journalists from other channels and print media began arriving on the island. The press was abuzz with headlines about Natalie Holloway's disappearance. Members of the media interviewed the girl's mother for hours. The story was covered nationwide, and every woman with a daughter sympathized with Beth. David received calls from strangers whose daughters were also missing in Aruba, and the police there hadn't even started a case. The public outcry was growing, so the island police called the trio, Joran and his 2 friends, in for questioning. In the investigator's office, the boys told a new story. That night, they took the girl to a lighthouse near Arashi Beach. That's the northwest part of the island. The purpose of the trip was shark watching. After that, they returned Natalie to the hotel. This happened on the night of May 30th at about 2 o'clock. Leaving, they saw in the mirror as the security guard approached the girl. The police recorded the statements and detained the 2 former guards of that hotel on June 5th. 4 days later, placed them under arrest. They were charged with the following counts: murder in the 1st or 2nd degree, kidnapping of a person resulting in his death. The island's Attorney General, Karen Jansen, held that post at the time, explained that the police were working on the theory that the guards were the culprits and were looking for hard evidence. But nothing concrete was found against the men. On the contrary, on June 14th, police officers searched the beach where Natalie was allegedly taken, and on June 15th, they came with a search warrant to Joran's house. As a result of the operation, video cameras and computers were found, and circumstantial evidence against the Dutchman was obtained. And on June 18th, those 2 guards were released. One of them reported that Satish Kalio secretly confessed to him about the events of that fateful night. It turned out that they had taken Natalie to that beach and left her alone with Joran. The father of the main suspect, Paul van der Sloot, was questioned next. He was even placed briefly in custody while the circumstances of his involvement or non-involvement in the crime were clarified. He and his son were released on June 25th. Another maneuver was carried out by Satish Kallio. He now claimed that Joran and his new girlfriend were dropped off outside the hotel on the night. In parallel, a nightclub employee admitted under oath that he saw all three suspects in a car outside the establishment at 2:30 a.m. But the police did not believe him, as the three were already at home at that time. The situation was becoming increasingly complex. Investigators were having difficulty building a complete picture of what had happened, and witnesses were giving conflicting testimony. Meanwhile, the search for Natalie continued unabated. Her relatives and friends, as well as police, military, and volunteers, were searching for her. Every inch of that beach and the surrounding area was searched. Divers were even called in to survey the water depths near the beach. But even these measures proved futile. 1.5 months after Natalie's disappearance, her family announced a reward of $200,000 to the person who would bring their daughter home alive and $100,000 to the person who would give adequate information to help find the missing girl. A couple weeks later, the reward amount increased to $1 million if the daughter returned to her parents alive. Beth stayed on the island for 2 months and left, having lost faith in success. And that trio again got under arrest. She was taken on August 26th, but was released a week later. Divers have re-examined the near depths of the water, and their radar detected human bones, but the signal was false. Already in March 2006, the police had witness statements at their disposal that Natalie had been seen that night, heavily intoxicated and carrying drugs. The deputy head of the local police, Gerald Domingue, interpreted this information as follows. The girl was under the influence of unknown substances and lost consciousness in a deserted place. Now the police version was based on the fact that Natalie died, and they were looking for her body on the beach and in the pond near the hotel. In parallel, Joran became envious of the media and TV attention to him and called newsrooms himself and made up tall tales. For example, Natalie was extorting money from him because of casino losses. But it didn't resonate. The guy and his friends enjoyed freedom after short-term arrests. The investigation did not have enough evidence to charge them with murder. Joran traveled the world. He even stayed in Thailand for 6 months. And during this period, he again pulled off frauds and got away with it. He became popular. He was invited to talk shows. In one of them, in response to tricky questions from the host, he splashed a glass of wine in his face, demonstrating his nasty character and unbalanced. The question was simple. Joran, why should citizens believe the nonsense you say? They came to light in November 2007. There are only 2 of them, but they broke the silence in the investigation. The first is the rendering of a witness who, on the night of May 30th, 2005, saw at 4 a.m. a guy described as looking a lot like Joran, pacing in one shoe, shabby, excited and wet below the waist. The impression was that he was half walking into a body of water of some kind. He followed from the pond to a fast food restaurant. Soon, a much older man arrived, described as Paul van der Sloot. He put the drenched guy in a red pickup truck and drove away fast. The second one was from Joran's ex-girlfriend. She said that once on one of their evening dates on the beach, the guy said that she is now next to someone who is able to get rid of the dead body. There was a third, but weaker clue. A fisherman reported that that very night, someone had broken into his cabin and stolen fish traps and devices that could, in theory, be used to increase body weight. And indeed, another diving expedition, funded by local businessman Louis Schaefer, using powerful equipment, managed to find a fishing net at a depth of 90 feet in a small radius from the same beach. The find happened on December 24, 2007. After 5 days, a remotely operated unit with an underwater video camera was sent to the point where the net was found. The technique explored the bottom and found something resembling a human skull, but it turned out to be the remains of some animal. The expedition found nothing else significant, and the investigation came to a dead end again. In early 2008, David received an email from a man saying that some drug dealers had disposed of his daughter's corpse and someone had paid them to do so. They were instructed to dump the body at sea, but they took the remains with them and left for Nicaragua. The unidentified man identified himself as Marcos. David forwarded the email to a private investigator for a background check, and the specialist traveled to Nicaragua to meet the recipient. The detective found this Marcos, showed him the remains in a blanket. During this time, the body had already fallen apart and had to be placed in 2 large boxes of ice. Marcos asked the detective to inform David Holloway that Natalie had been found, albeit dead. But the detective delayed such a message so as not to discourage the unhappy father. The meeting was over, and soon Marcos disappeared without a trace. No one ever heard from him. It was assumed that he was killed for breaking the silence. In February 2010, his father died of a heart attack, and the son was left without a powerful patron. Joran, knowing about the awards announced by Natalie's parents, sent their lawyer, John Kelly, an email. In the email, he introduced himself as J.P. Sanders, the man who knows where the body of the wanted girl is hidden. And for this information, he needs $250,000. John, after consulting with Beth, agreed to meet with such an informant in Aruba and said that he would transfer $25,000 as an advance payment. In return came a letter that if the payment was refused, it was unlikely Natalie's body would ever be found. The Holloway family suspected that Joran was hiding under Jay's name and contacted the FBI. A plan was devised to make the fraudster think the transaction was going through. The plan was to take him down for financial fraud. And with him in custody, it would be easier to investigate other cases. The Holloway family lawyer flew to Aruba. Joran got the promised advance after all and brought John to a house near the racket club. The guy claimed he brought Natalie to the beach that May night, harassed her sexually, got rebuffed, pushed her onto the rocks in a rage. She fell on the back of her head, bleeding profusely, and the girl died instantly. The guy first hid the body on the beach and then took it to the construction site where the house was being built, where she and John are now. At that time, only the foundation was being laid, and Joran threw the corpse into the concrete. John suggested that the narrator turn himself into the authorities. He agreed and promised to do so because he was, allegedly, conscience-stricken. After that, the lawyer flew to the USA. The guy's words were difficult to verify, and the police considered his story to be an essay, insufficient for an arrest. In the meantime, Joran wrote to John that he had been taken into custody, and he himself went to Peru to spend the $25,000 he had received. In Lima, he was drinking hard and continuing his shady dealings. One night at the Atlantic City Casino, he met Stephanie Flores, a local 21-year-old student. They played poker for almost 2 hours and then drove to Joran's hotel. Cameras at the entrance recorded their arrival at 5:33 a.m. The couple checked into room 309. After 3 hours, the guy called the front desk asking to be released from the room, that he couldn't open the door. After 20 minutes, he was helped out. He left the room alone, without even taking his bag or turning off the TV, and asked the managers not to disturb his guest as she was sleeping. 2 days later, the maid found Stephanie's corpse in the room with numerous bruises and bruises. The girl's father was an authoritative person in Peru and an influential businessman, and made every effort to ensure that the killer of his daughter was promptly found. And the main suspect was announced in the international search. Joran himself hid in Chile. He tried to change his appearance, changed the color of his hair, and soon shaved them off completely, total renewal of his closet. But these measures did not help him. He was quickly caught and taken to Peru. To the Lima police, he claimed he was innocent. And so it went on for 4 days of arrest. He couldn't take it anymore and confessed to what he had done. That night with Stephanie, they played online poker in the room. The guy went out to the balcony for a while, and when he returned, he saw that his guest was digging into his laptop and studying the press articles on Natalie's disappearance. They included the name and photo of her new acquaintance. She hurried away, but Joran caught up with her and kicked her hard in the head, back and neck, punching her in the face. After calming down, the tyrant went to the shower. When he came out, he saw Stephanie still breathing and strangled her with a rolled-up shirt, then raped her dead body. An autopsy revealed that the poor girl's neck and spine were fractured, and even if she had survived, she would have been permanently paralyzed. This egregious murder sparked intense public anger in both Peru and the United States. Remarkably, the date of Stefan's death coincided with the day Natalie was killed. Joran was tried, and the public demanded the death penalty, but the sentence was lenient. After a series of hearings, the final verdict was announced only in 2012, a prison term of 28.5 years in a high-security colony. The list of charges for the formation of the designated decision is as follows: murder in the first and second degree, robbery in Peru, extortion, fraud with bank accounts and cards in the United States. Nor did his lawyer's efforts to build a defense on Stephanie's accidental murder and his client's intensive psychological distress over Natalie Holloway's history. A murderer and a conman behind bars. The Holloway family breathed a sigh of relief after so many years of litigation. It was a victory with bitterness, for there was no bringing their daughter back. Joran was imprisoned in Peru's Castro prison, one of the harshest prisons in the world. Television crews from the Netherlands even visited him to film how he survived. It is not known for what audience this material was intended. Perhaps it served as a warning of what happens to such criminals. The next guest was unexpectedly Beth Holloway. She didn't want to socialize with the murderer. She longed to simply enjoy his torment in prison and feel her victory. Joran looked at her with empty eyes, looking vile and pathetic. For the sake of this picture, the woman had spared no expense and time to fly to Peru, further stay, and Lady Figueroa. It was July 2014. The perpetrator was serving his allotted sentence. But even there, he managed to have an intimate affair. His chosen one was a certain Lady Figueroa. This Peruvian woman met the prisoner in 2010. Then she was visiting another prisoner. She saw Joran by chance and soaked up sympathy for him, apparently without knowing his nature. They rarely saw each other in Castro prison, and close visits were forbidden there. After 3 years, the offender was transferred to another correctional institution, Pedra Gordas. It was characterized by milder conditions and approval of special visits. For this purpose, a special room was created there, where Joran and Lady were repeatedly secluded. Because of his unstable nature, the prisoner repeatedly broke discipline and even threatened the warden with violence. For this, he was transferred to Chilapa prison, hidden in the Andes Mountains. In September 2014, Lady gave birth to a daughter with Joran, and a few days after that, she told Dutch reporters that her lover had been badly stabbed in prison and was not receiving proper care. It turned out that what she said was bogus, and the warden of the institution publicly called her a liar. The next year, she continued to push her line, and Fox News Latina aired a letter Joran allegedly wrote to his sweetheart. The essence of the appeal: he is afraid to die, because Stephanie's angry father announced a reward of $10,000 to whoever eliminates the killer of his daughter. The prisoner asked for protection and transfer to another place. And this maneuver turned out to be a hoax, only on Joran's part. But the public already knew he was a liar and a sociopath, and they hated him more. It was June 2023. The perpetrator was extradited from Peru to the United States. In federal court in Birmingham, he received a new indictment, this time for another racketeering offense. The defendant did not accept the verdict, and in October of that year, he finally made confessions about the evil he had committed on May 29, 2005. He had indeed killed Natalie that night and then bribed the police to cover for him. Then he and his cronies took the girl away from the nightclub to the beach. There she became nauseous from the drink she had drunk and the substance she had been spiked with. Joran asked his brothers to leave him alone with his new acquaintance. She lightly embraced him. He regarded it as a call for an intimate act. The guy started to harass her, for which he got a kick on his genitals. After that, he became furious and in a fit of anger began to hit the girl on the head with his knee and added a heavy cinder block. He hit her several times until the skull was crushed to smithereens. After that, he dumped the corpse in the sea. This official confession was made almost 18 years after the atrocity. And under Aruba law, the case is already considered closed because of the limited statute of limitations, 12 years. The island's prosecutor contacted the U.S. Department of Justice for advice and requested the defendant's file. There, after a series of discussions, the case of Natalie's murder is still open to this day, despite the killer's confession. The trial has made headlines around the world. The disappearance of a young defenseless girl in a foreign country, the bestial cruelty and machinations of Joran, the cover-up of crimes by his father and the bot police. These facts became more frightening than any thriller. Beth said that her daughter could have become an excellent student at the university, built a successful career, and been a wonderful person, if not for that unfortunate trip to Aruba and acquaintance with this scumbag. Her mother wished the corrupt policeman to be punished and regretted that the man officially responsible for her daughter's death had not been punished for the deed, although he is in prison, but it is a sentence for other crimes. All America sympathizes with Beth and despises the vile, inadequate, and hypocritical beast named Joran. Antonia Barra was born on December 3rd in the late 80s in Temuco, Chile, about 650 kilometers south of Santiago. She was the daughter of Alejandro Barra and Marcela Parra. In addition to Antonia, the couple raised 4 other children: Sebastian, Catalina, Ignacia, and Carla. It was an ordinary, average family. Parents gave their son and daughters due attention, provided everything they needed, helped in their studies, and motivated them to succeed. The boys grew up in love and did not cause much trouble to their mother and father. All of them became good, respected people. Antonia was the object of Alejandro and Marcela's pride, even from adolescence. The girl was responsible for any task and diligently studied at school. She dreamed of traveling around the world and purposefully went forward to the realization of her desires. In the same city of Temuco lived a young man named Martin Pradens Duar, a few years older than Antonia. His parents were Ivan Pradens and Paula Duar. Martin's brother's name was Thomas, and his sister's name was Francisca. His biography did not become public, but it is known that even in his early youth, a girl named Danila Alanis Alvarez gave birth to a child from him, after which they scattered. In 2015-2017, Antonia and Martin communicated on one of the popular social networks. Antonia, who at that time was not even 15 years old, left comments on the photos of the man, where he was captured with his daughter. It is assumed that their communication did not go beyond the virtual space. A few years later, the girl entered the university and fully focused on university studies. Having started her studies in the specialty of engineering commerce, she immersed herself in a new world and met a lot of peers who had the same aspirations as her: to study hard, become professionals, and build a happy future. Among them was Consuelo Uribe, a law student. Around the same time, Antonia was dating a young man named Rodrigo Canario Aguado. In August 2019, the couple broke up. Deciding to distract from the sad thoughts inspired by the breakup, Antonia suggested to her friend Consuelo to go somewhere. The date of the trip girls chose not by chance. That day, September 18th, celebrated the annual national holiday of Chile. Coincidentally, the event coincided with Rodrigo's birthday. As for the place of rest, the friends planned to get to the tourist town of Pucón, the road to which should take a couple of hours by car. In this town was the summer residence of a good friend of Antonia's family. Martin was also invited to Pucón for the celebration. He was to join an electronic music party where his friend DJ Rodrigo Morales was to play. Martin left Temuco at noon on September 17, 2019. He was not alone, but in the company of friends who had split into 2 cars. The man intended to return home the next day. Having reached their destination, the guys had a disco in a house rented by the DJ that same day, around 6:30 in the evening. Antonia and Consuelo got into a car and also headed towards Pucón. 3 of their buddies rode with them, but upon arrival, all were housed in different places. The girls stayed at the summer residence of the Uribe family. At about 8 p.m., They started packing for a party that was being held at the Black Room nightclub, formerly known as Sala Murano. The night promised to be unforgettable. The girls, tired from their hard studies, finally breathed freely. They got dressed up, put on makeup, and went to the club. There they opened a couple of bottles of sparkling wine and began to drink, socialize with others, and dance. Antonia's father, Alejandro, texted his daughter asking her to take care of herself, not to trust strangers, and not to put herself in danger. 10 minutes later, Antonia replied to him, promising to be careful and cautious. At this time, Martin's company was about to leave for the first planned party. As he later recounted at trial, they left there around 10:30 p.m. It was a disco with electronic music, and the friends stayed there until 2:30 or 3:00 in the morning. When they met, Martin and Antonia felt very good and cozy in each other's company. They danced and talked a lot. Both were happy in a special way. Around 1 a.m., an intoxicated Antonia and Consuelo got into a cab and drove to another club where they met up with friends and drank some tequila. At one point, Antonia walked away from the others and headed to the electronic music section on the second floor. There, she met her classmate Benjamin Morales. They danced and occasionally walked around the bar area and terrace before returning to the dance floor. Sometimes they would hold hands and even kiss. Soon, Martin showed up at the event. When he approached the bar, Antonia was completely drunk. Later, Benjamin bought her another drink, but Antonia dropped it. At some point, she suddenly disappeared. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuelo went looking for her friend and found her talking to Emilio Gobich, a mutual acquaintance of theirs. When Consuelo said she wanted to leave, Antonia replied that she would prefer to stay. Her friend advised her to stop drinking, but she did not listen, and a short time later she was chatting with Martin again at the bar. Later in his official written statement, Emilio said that he witnessed this 10-minute conversation, after which the couple headed for the stairs. Emilio noticed that Martin was holding Antonia's hand, but she was oblivious and looking upward. Whether she was talking to a man or was disoriented because of alcohol, this Gobich could not understand. But it seemed to him that the girl was not well, because her eyes were completely white. Emilio later speculated that Martin had invited Antonia to join him and his company at the rented house, and the girl had agreed. Temuco Police Sex Crimes Detective Marcela Calderon reconstructed the incident according to witness statements. According to friends of the accused, they left the club in 2 cars and there was no room for the couple. That is why Martin and Antonia went on foot. On the way, they came across a supermarket whose CCTV footage provided the most concrete evidence that they were walking together. Examining what she saw, Detective Calderon suggested that the defendant practically forced the victim into the store, as her resistance was evident in the video. As noted by prosecutor Miguel Rojas, also of the Temuco Sex Crimes Service, the girl's condition put her in a vulnerable position to the perpetrator. Antonia had too much to drink, and the alcohol had a negative impact on her nervous system, which was not observed in relation to the accused. The situation of domination on the part of Martin and resistance on the part of the victim was present, and this certainly does not justify the actions of the perpetrator, especially with regard to the first sexual assault suffered by Antonia. The couple was later caught on camera as they walked down the sidewalk again in the direction of the rented house. All 8 people present at the house agreed on one thing. Antonia and Martin showed up there around 8 a.m. There was only one woman in that company, 19-year-old Barbara Fredrickson. She had only recently joined the party and was the only one who hadn't drunk alcohol. This is probably why she accurately observed that the couple, whom she did not know, were heavily intoxicated. Antonia's own memories were fuzzy. She did not quite remember the details, but one thing was quite clear. Martin had gone into the room with her, where he had committed an act of violence, and then left to join his buddies, listening to music in the living room. Left alone and not knowing what to do, the confused Antonia called her friend, Felipe Inostrosa, but he did not understand anything from her words. The girl's voice sounded as if she was drunk and had difficulty expressing her thoughts. Unfortunately, Felipe didn't pay attention to her condition. Besides, he was in a different city and had had a bit to drink himself. It was too risky and a little absurd to go to Pucón to pick up Antonia, to take her to a house that was quite close to the rented one. Then the girl contacted Consuelo by sending her a voice message. Only after much effort did her friend manage to understand what she was saying. After determining her location via GPS, Consuelo went to look for Antonia along with her boyfriend, Jose Tomas Monje. While Jose waited outside, Consuelo entered the house and ran into Martin there. But she pretended not to know anything, hurriedly picked up Antonia, and they drove home together. Consuelo and Jose tried to calm the distressed girl, hugging her and trying to talk to her, but she was desperate. Her father, Alejandro, had no idea what was happening. He sent her a text message to see how she had spent the evening. In doing so, the man made a joke asking how much she had drunk, and Antonia supported his jokey. She didn't want her dad to find out what had happened to her. Consuelo and Jose insisted that the girl go to the police to report the sexual assault, but she refused because otherwise her parents would definitely find out about everything. The next day, Antonia met with Martin and decided to talk to him, but he acted brazenly and claimed that everything had happened consensually. This is what he said later on. For the next few weeks, Antonia remained silent about her experience of violence on that September night. She revealed the truth only to her closest friends. The girl could not rid herself of the unpleasant feeling. She felt that she had become dirty. She did not want to go to the police, as she was afraid that others would find out about the incident. To her friends, she asked them to keep their mouths shut. Deciding to carry her load alone, Antonia tried her best to act normal. Even her childhood friend with whom she was in close contact didn't notice anything unusual. Unlike Sigmund Alonso, a fellow student at the university, who realized that something was wrong with Antonia because her grades had dropped dramatically. For example, she failed 2 test papers, and to his questions as to why this happened, she answered that she was not ready because of a bad mood. In the midst of all these events, Antonia's secret became known to her former boyfriend, Rodrigo. Only rumors, distorted and unfair, reached him. Needless to say that the guy made his own opinion about the act of Antonia, and it spoke clearly not in her favor. On October 12th, the former lover wrote him a message with a rebuke, saying that she was not to blame for what happened. However, he did not believe her. This was confirmed by Francesca Duran, a friend of Antonia, who witnessed Rodrigo's emotions. The next day, Antonia sent a farewell message to the boyfriend. A little later, she shared in the family's messenger group a video from her childhood where she danced while smiling at the camera. It was like a signal that she couldn't cope with the difficult experiences. On October 13, 2019, Carla's sister came to visit her parents, and the first thing she did was go up to Antonia's room. She was lying on the bed, and Carla thought she was asleep. The light was on. Antonia asked for the light to be turned off, whereupon her sister asked her about Martin, and as she left, she told her that she loved her. A short time later, Antonia committed suicide on the 3rd floor of her home in Temuco. At about 7 p.m., Marcela, the girl's mother, knocked on her room several times but received no answer. When she went inside, she saw her daughter without signs of life. Distraught with grief, the woman ran to the neighbors for help. They came and helped to take the girl's body downstairs. Later, a forensic medical expert determined the cause of death to be self-suffocation. Questions arose that no one could answer. A bright, sociable girl, always striving for knowledge, dreaming of traveling, made such a strange decision. Why? Alejandro realized that if the daughter committed such a serious act, it means that with her there was a tragedy, which she carefully concealed. Determined to get justice, the man hired several private investigators. A few hours after Antonia's breathless body was found, he spoke to the local press and said that his daughter had reason to do what she had done. The notes started pouring in, the reporting began, the questions began. But Alejandro knew what he was getting into. The staff of the private detective agency were able to recreate the last days of the girl's life. The parents filed a complaint against Martin and began to wait for the results of the investigation. The father periodically received invitations to various TV shows where he spoke and told about what happened, swallowing tears. The country was going through hard times, There were many large-scale upheavals, and Antonia's tragedy resonated in the hearts of millions. The girl's name appeared on the walls of buildings, in hashtags on social media, on posters demanding justice. Her death had such a powerful effect that in less than a week, 7 new charges against Martin for alleged sexual harassment surfaced. The man's relatives filed a petition for legal defense and an appeal alleging that certain members of Antonia's family had violated the right to honor and respect for privacy, as enshrined in Article 19, Paragraph 4 of the Chilean Constitution. In particular, they noted that some of their personal data, such as address and phone numbers, had been made public and that they had received many aggressive messages and images on social media. Martin's family added that those involved included Antonia's loved ones. On June 12, 2020, the court in Temuco decided to grant the motion ordering the Antonia family to refrain from disclosing data and facts about the petitioners through social media. They were also obliged to refrain from offensive or defamatory publications. The decision caused outrage among many. People felt that such measures only served to protect the alleged rapist. Antonia's family appealed, but the Supreme Court affirmed the Temuco court's decision on July 21st. Martin's lawyer, Gaspar Calderon, then filed a petition with the Temuco Court of Appeals, requesting the imposition of protective measures. That same month, Martin was formally charged with assaults committed between 2010 and 2019, which was the beginning of an investigation that captured national attention, called the Antonia case. It has come to symbolize the plea for justice by thousands of victims of violence. On July 22nd, the loved ones of the dead girl and the prosecutor's office were once again disappointed. The Temuco Guarantee Court revoked the defendant's detention and ordered full house arrest. Judge Federico Gutierrez explained that this preventive measure should not prejudge the punishment. The Temuco prosecutor's office charged Martin with 5 alleged sexual offenses against other women committed between 2010 and 2019. However, the court chose to register only 2 of those incidents. Among the incidents was one that took place between December 2012 and January 2013. The complaint came from a 13-year-old girl. The decision on house arrest and the dropping of the investigation into some of the assaults sparked protests and brought thousands of outraged people on the streets in different cities across the country. Later, the Court of Appeal in Temuco reviewed the case at the request of the public prosecutor's office, canceled the precautionary measure taken, and decided to detain Martin, considering him a danger to society. A few days later, the same court lifted the statute of limitations for 2 other cases of violence. Alejandro worked actively with feminist organizations to draft a law that would establish penalties for similar crimes. In preparation for the trial, Martin's cell phone was discovered in February 2021. The prosecutor's office requested additional time to conduct an examination of the device and then reported the results. It turned out that the phone contained images in which the defendant displayed women's underwear and explicitly boasted about his actions. On August 26, the Araucanía prosecutor's office filed the indictment against Martin. Alejandro appealed to the community not to remain indifferent to the actions of such rapists. He noted the importance of taking action in situations where a woman is seemingly taken away by a man without force, but is under the influence of alcohol and therefore in a vulnerable state. He also asked the media to stop publishing images of Antonia in the company of the accused. In January 2022, pre-trial preparation hearings concluded, and Temuco Judge Alfredo Cox denied the defense's 7th request to change custody to house arrest for Martin. A few months later, on June 14th, the hearing began in Temuco Criminal Court and was scheduled to last 37 days. During this period, the criminal's defense presented a number of expert and witness testimonies, as well as documentary evidence. On August 6th, the court handed down a guilty verdict against Martin on crimes against sexual integrity and sexual assault. On August 26th, the verdict was announced, 20 years in prison. However, it did not take long for Antonia's relatives to enjoy a sense of justice. On September 6th, an appeal against the sentence filed by Martin's lawyers was accepted for consideration. A few months later, on December 29th, the Supreme Court accepted the defense appeal and ordered a new trial. The decision came after a lack of impartiality was found in Leonel Torres' conviction of Martin. Meanwhile, the tireless work of Marcela and Alejandro bore fruit. The formation of the so-called Antonia Law began. The aim of the project was to change several laws to improve due process, protect the rights of victims of sexual offenses, and prevent the recurrence of such events. It was established that a person who committed an act of violence and thereby pushed the victim to suicide would be punished with imprisonment. With the advent of 2023, preparations for the new trial began, which was not without surprises. On March 16th, Martin's team of private attorneys resigned, and consequently, the defendant's case fell into the hands of the public defense. Finally, on April 24th, the second trial began for 5 cases of sexual violence and 2 cases of forcible sexual intercourse committed between November 2010 and September 2019 in the Araucania region. Martin waived his right to remain silent and gave his version of events, denying that he intentionally committed the crimes and attributing what happened to excessive alcohol consumption. In response, prosecutors said he chose the most vulnerable victims, taking advantage of the drunken women's inability to resist him. On July 7, 2023, the man was found guilty of sexual offenses. After the trial, Judge Jose Ignacio Rao stated that the evidence of the victims, witnesses, and police agents was coherent, consistent, complementary, and sufficient. It was also ruled that Martin could never again work in educational institutions or places that involved direct and constant interaction with minors. The federal prosecutor's office demanded a sentence of 41 years in prison, Araucania Regional. Prosecutor Roberto Garrido said that no matter what sentence the judge handed down, they appreciated his decision because it meant that violence had been established and justice had been served. On July 28, 2023, Chilean justice sentenced 31-year-old Martin Pradenas to 17 years in prison for 7 sexual crimes committed against 6 victims. With the 3 years he spent in custody, he will serve 14 years behind bars. Is it necessary to talk about the frustration of a father who lost his daughter? Alejandro said that despite the fact that the perpetrator went to prison, Antonia's loved ones still continue to suffer unbearably. The verdict of the judge was only a consolation that could not relieve them of the terrible grief, because even 40 or 100 years of punishment for the criminal will never bring back the life of cheerful, kind, and bright Antonia.